Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk! Today, we're talking about the moon. What is it? Is it made of cheese? Is there a man living in it? Is it the Death Star? Dun, dun, dun. Why does the moon look like the Death Star, and why does the Death Star look like the moon? I don't know, but we're about to find out on Coffee Talk! Was the moon landing faked? Did we even go there ever? What about the footage? Did Stanley Kubrick actually film the footage of the moon landing in a Hollywood studio? Well, let's talk about the moon for a minute while we have some coffee. So we know what scientists tell us the moon is. It was a body that was floating around space, and when it zipped by the Earth kind of reached out and grabbed it with its gravity and pulled it into a gravitational orbit around the Earth. Now, this orbit is very peculiar in the fact that the Earth's moon is in perfect orbit around the Earth to perfectly eclipse the sun. So, if the moon were smaller and in the same orbit, you would have this much larger corona or ring around the moon, and when the moon eclipses the sun, you would never have a total eclipse. But our moon is perfectly positioned mathematically between the Earth and the sun as to, at times, completely eclipse the sun with only a tiny, brilliant corona around the edge during an eclipse. Many of you recently experienced this eclipse last year of a total eclipse. And if the moon were smaller or bigger or closer or farther, that would not be possible. There's something eerie about the fact that the moon is placed so perfectly in orbit as to eclipse the sun. Another element that's weird about the Earth and the scientific ideas behind the moon is that the Earth was supposed to have captured the moon as it went by. It reached out with its gravitational pull and pulled it into orbit, into a perfect orbit that would eclipse the sun from time to time. This orbit is non-decaying and it's fixed. The orbit is interesting, and another reason that it's very rare, the kind of orbit that the moon is captured in, is because the same side of the moon always faces the Earth. In other words, the moon doesn't spin. It's a stationary object, and the Earth is here, and so the same side of the moon always faces the Earth, no matter what is going on. So we have no idea of what's going on the back side of the moon. Now, people call that the dark side of the moon. That's actually a misnomer. It's not necessarily dark over there, that it gets sun at times as well. What's a better accurate statement is the far side of the moon. We don't know what's going on the far side of the moon. There could be alien bases. There could be advanced civilizations. This could be where the UFOs are coming from. This could be heaven or hell on the back side of the moon. But I think what's interesting is that the moon itself might very well be hollow. That Russian scientists some time ago had come to the conclusion that the moon must be hollow, since its mass is so much less than the Earth. That the Earth's mass is greater in comparison, in ratio to its size. That the only conclusion is that the moon is either made out of a much lighter material, or the moon itself is hollow. And this goes along with the some of the ancient African and Native American mythology concerning the moon, that there was said to be a time before there was a moon, that the moon is a recent addition to the Earth, and that it caused many Earth changes when the moon came into orbit. And they often refer to the moon as an egg, because they say that they believe, according to their ancient mythology, that the Earth is like an egg, like a hard-boiled egg with the yolk removed. Not the Earth, rather, but the moon. That the moon is like an egg, hard-boiled, with the yolk removed. Excuse me, I need some coffee. And this is why they call it an egg, and that's the exact kind of description that the Russian scientists came to the conclusion, that the moon has a very hard outer skin, which I'll talk about here in a second, a softer core, and then a completely hollow inner core. And they've done this they've figured this out through gravitational measurements, and they've analyzed the mass of it in Russia. Because unlike America, Russian scientists keep asking questions even though other scientists says they found the answers. They don't believe them, they just keep looking. Here, if someone finds the answer, we all must obey and follow that scientific ideology. Even if you see cracks in it, you're not supposed to look at it or poke at it. So that's another topic for a video. But you've got this hollow moon concept, and one of the things, there's some scientific, real strong scientific backing for the idea that the moon is hollow. Check this out: the craters. Now, you know the moon is covered in these craters. They're small, they're large, they're big, they're little, they're immense. Some of them are the size of oceans, these giant craters that are from space debris hitting the moon and knocking holes in it. But, as we know on Earth, when that happens, you get a bigger object makes a deeper crater. A smaller object makes a shallower crater. So you have a difference in the size of the crater, but also the depth of the crater. But not on the moon. It's as if just under the surface of the moon is a hard substructure that some are calling metallic, that many believe that it's metallic and not stone or any kind of natural, but some kind of metallic metal sphere that is under the surface of the moon, because all of the craters of the moon are the same depth. They only go down so far and something just flat stops them. And it's something hard enough to pulverize an asteroid. And that even though some of these immense craters should be miles deep, they're not. They're the same depth as much smaller craters. And so when they did the moon mission, when they detached from the command module from the main body of the rocket, that I guess it was the afterburners, were ejected in the moon's orbit and sent to the Earth. Now, they knew this would happen as the orbit decayed, and they knew that they intentionally crashed it on the moon. And they had people on the ground who'd set up seismic recording devices to see what the impact would sound like or feel like. Would it move the foundations of the moon to have this thing crash on the moon? So NASA intentionally crashes this on the moon and measures it. And the thing they find out is astonishing. They say the moon rang like a bell. That's right, you heard me. When this man-made object hit the surface of the moon sang. It rang out like a bell, like a giant bell from a church steeple. And it rang for hours. And they recorded it. On the following trips, they repeated the same experiment over and over again. And they can ring the moon like a bell. And it vibrates in sympathy, which suggests that it has to be a metallic sphere. The moon is a metallic sphere. So if that's the case, it's made by some higher thinking civilization. If the moon is a hollow sphere, it might very well be a spaceship. And you know me, once I'm looking at something scientifically, then I want to know what ancient religions and mythologies had to say about it. So, interesting enough, Orpheus, who was said to be the son of Apollo in Greek mythology, was credited for writing a series of songs, the Songs of Orpheus. And in these songs, he talks about the moon. He talks about the moon being hollow and filled with cities and a great civilization of higher intelligent beings, human beings apparently, or gods, that live inside of the moon. Dun, dun, dun. So because of the precision of the way that the moon is in orbit, because of this bell effect whenever anything strikes the moon, because of the scientists in Russia who claim the moon is hollow, all of these things lead us to believe that it might be of intelligent design. And it makes us think of Star Wars. It just does. The Death Star. Is the moon a Death Star? Well, it certainly seems to have brought death to Earth when it came, because one of the things about the mythology is that when the moon shows up, the next thing that pretty much happens is the flood. Was the moon being set in orbit around the Earth the cause of the Great Flood? Was the moon further out and then got drawn into the orbit, and it didn't have the power to get back out again, and it got trapped there, and they stabilized? I mean, there's all of these concepts. Is it a weapon? Is it a base? Are there things on the backside of the surface of the moon that we don't know are there? And then there's those pictures, those NASA pictures that look like there's pyramids on the moon. It looks like there's buildings on the moon. It looks like there's bases and tunnels and things and bridges and roads on the moon. You know, the more I learn about things, the more I know that we don't know nothing. We don't know nothing, really. The more I learn, the more I realize we don't know a thing. And we're just guessing. Everyone's guessing. The doctors, the scientists, the conspiracy theorists, everybody's guessing. So it's very interesting to me that the moon might be hollow, that it might be inhabited. Is this where heaven is? Is God's throne inside the moon? Is this where hell is? Is the moon populated by reptilian shape-shifting demons? And what about the moon landing? Did it happen at all? You know, if you go and watch some videos, you will see some very strong indication that maybe this footage that we all grew up with, that was supposed to have come from the moon, might have been shot on a LA soundstage in Hollywood by, oh gosh, I had his name, Stanley Kubrick. That's kind of on the DL. Stanley Kubrick claims that maybe his best work he never got credited for, that maybe he was responsible for that footage. I do know this. I'm fairly convinced that there was a transmission on the medical channel from the crew when they first touched down on the moon back to Earth, that was intercepted by citizen radio operators, by civilian radio operators who were monitoring NASA frequencies with their own homemade equipment. They claim, many of them claim, that there was a conversation that I have heard that sounds a lot like our astronauts explaining that when they landed on the surface of the moon, that there were several alien spacecraft already parked there waiting for them, and they wanted to know what to do, and that they switched over to a medical channel to talk about it, but these private radio guys still heard it anyway. So was the moon already inhabited? Then you've got Corey Goode, who claims that the Vril Society and the Nazis made a deal with extraterrestrials and got some advanced technology, and that the people that the 1960s astronaut met on the moon were actually Nazis. That they were actually Nazis who had already gone up there and colonized the moon. I'll tell you this. What is the moon? I don't know. She's pretty to look at. It does have an effect on people. Full moons change my personality. And some of the women in my life were absolutely ruled by the moon. When the moon was full, you could expect some kind of bizarre behavior. They call it lunacy for a reason. Like the moon makes you crazy. Moons are the full moon is tied to the vampire. So, you know, and to the werewolf. This body being put in by an alien race, potentially, into our orbit might have been the thing that caused the flood. You know, it would definitely change things, since we know the moon is responsible for tides, and tides are responsible for weather. You know, the Bible does talk about a time before the flood when there was no weather, when it didn't rain on the earth. Wow, that's a big consideration there. Just a mist, a dew, a water canopy. Did the moon destroy the natural? Is that what killed off all the giant trees? When the moon was dragged into our orbit, did it change our world to the degree that the trees could no longer survive? And maybe that's what happened to the dinosaurs. The moon may be the key to all of it. Dun. So from now on, instead of saying, what the heck, I'm going to start saying, what the moon? Because the moon could be the key to all of it. What do you think? Tell me in the comments section. Was the moon landing faked? Is the moon the Death Star? Is it hollow? Is it made of cheese? Is there a man inside of it? Is it heaven? Is it hell? Or is it just something pretty to look at on a starry night? I don't know. You tell me. And we'll talk to you next time on Coffee Talk.